Hi winners, we're here with the Night Gardener Part 3. It is day 1 of Camp Ride Along If We Were Together, so I thought I'd bring the studio outside. I hope there's not too much crazy noise. I hope the birds don't interrupt too much, but I like it. We're camping, so Sammy and I are here. The cat might jump in, just wave if he does. Here we go. You've been waiting. I will keep you waiting no longer. Chapter 38 of Night Gardener. We left yesterday or the day before or whenever you watched the video, and Dr. Crouch and Molly and Kip had caught Hester Kettle in their trap. Here we go. "What are you doing here?" Molly demanded. Hester dangled before them, her arms and legs jutting out of the net at odd angles. "Why, just hanging about," and she gave a sideways smile as she rocked past. "Just as I thought." Dr. Crouch thrust a finger in the air. "Your spirit is nothing more than a disease-ridden vagrant." I'm not sure of the word vagrant. I can promise you it was not a compliment, and you can always look it up. "Storyteller, if it pleases," Hester said. "Contagious, no doubt. She's probably given Crouch fever to half the valley." Dr. Crouch traded his camera for a large syringe from his belt and removed a cork from the end of the needle. "Now, children, hold the woman down while I collect a sample of her blood." "Save your time," Molly said. "She's not what's making us sick." The doctor hesitated, needle poised. "Are you quite certain?" "Because were I to imagine a source of Crouch fever, it might look something exactly like that." Hester batted her eyelashes. "You are just too kind, sir." Molly grabbed the net, turning Hester to face her. "You didn't answer my question. What are you doing here?" The old woman hemmed and hawed. "Well, love, it's kind of hard to say." Molly folded her arms. "Try it." "She's come for the tree." Kip stepped beside Molly. "Just look at what she's carrying." So Kip's using his imprinting skills. He indicated the sharp thing clasped in the woman's hand. In the light of Dr. Crouch's lamp, Molly could see that it was a pair of old shears. "She was going to take a cutting of the tree," he said, "snip off a little bit so she could plant one of her own." How many of you would want a night gardener's tree, knowing what we know? Molly looked back at Hester. "Is that true?" Hester sighed. "True or not, it's clear you're set on believing it." She eyed the branch overhead, which was sagging perilously. "Perhaps you might let me down so we can hash this out like good neighbors." Much as Molly would have liked to let Hester dangle, she knew that if the branch snapped, their trap would be ruined. She nodded to Kip, who hobbled to Galileo and set to coaxing him back toward the house. The net jerked up and down as the horse fought against its reins. "Easy with that horsey there," Hester called. "You wouldn't want to drop an old woman on her head, now would you?" "Wouldn't we?" Molly stepped back as the net slowly worked its way to the ground. The doctor, who had evidently gotten his hopes up about finding a cure, was clearly out of sorts. He removed the tin plate from his camera, and he tossed it aside. "My dear woman, do you realize that you've just interrupted, I dare say, ruined an extremely important experiment?" He swatted a leaf from the air in front of him. "I am on the cusp of a discovery here that could change my career. Have you anything to say for yourself?" Hester looked as if she were about to oblige, but stopped short. A hollow moaning filled the darkness. She widened her eyes, looking past the doctor toward the house. Her expression was a mixture of terror and fascination. "As luck might have it," she swallowed, raising a trembling finger, "you still might get your chance." An icy gust of wind rattled the leaves around them. Galileo snorted frantically, pulling at his reins. The net swayed perilously from side to side, and the tree groaned overhead. Molly shivered, slowly turning around. The night gardener was watching them. And with that, I'll keep reading. Molly stared at the gardener, who was standing at the edge of the drive, the open front door behind him, the shovel and watering can in his hands. Even in the shadows, his skin shone with a silver light. He did not move, but cocked his head, looking between them with patient curiosity. Like a story come to life, Hester murmured breathlessly. "Keep still," Molly whispered. "Don't nobody move or shout. He's just here for the tree. He won't hurt us none." She tried not to think about whether or not this was in fact true. She definitely tried not to think about the open graves at her feet. Dr. Crouch grabbed his camera box and inched towards the night gardener. "I just need one photograph." "Doctor, no!" Molly reached for his arm, but she was too slow. Crouch was already on the other side of the tree. He uncorked a bottle from his belt and dumped some powder into the flash tray. Hester leaned towards Molly. "You sure he won't hurt us, love?" Molly swallowed. "I'm not sure of anything anymore." Dr. Crouch was now only a few feet from the drive. The night gardener had not moved, but Molly could hear a low sough of warning. "Crouch, old boy, say hello to history." And the doctor inched closer like a man hypnotized. The spirit cocked his head, his black eyes fixed on the doctor. Dead leaves circled around him like a barrier. Dr. Crouch slowly aimed his camera at the night gardener. Whoosh! The leaves attacked, knocking the doctor back. He shouted as a gust of wind ripped the camera from his hands. The wooden box sailed through the darkness, flying straight past Molly's head and smashing against the side of the house. "So much for this experiment," Hester called, her net swaying in the wind. "Run, you fools!" Dr. Crouch was sprinting straight towards them with a look of bloodless terror on his face. "Out of my way!" And he shoved Molly aside, nearly knocking her into one of the open graves. "Step aside, boy," he bellowed. "I'm commandeering this wagon." He was fighting with Kip for control of the reins. Kip, however, would not give up. "Let go, you fat glob!" Galileo snorted, pulling against his harness. The wagon rolled forward and back and forward and back, and Molly heard a clatter as Hester's net swung wildly from one side and slammed against the side of the house. She heard more shouting from the wagon, and the net slid high into the air. "Perhaps you give your brother a hand," Hester called down, the humor draining from her voice. Molly looked back at the night gardener, who now had the shovel in his hand, raised like a weapon. Molly looked to the wagon and saw that Dr. Crouch, who had knocked Kip to the ground, was now pulling himself onto the bench. She sprang to her feet and ran towards him. "The trap! We have to lower the net!" She grabbed hold of his apron. "Unhand me!" And the doctor struck Molly hard across the cheek. She gripped the side of the wagon, gasping. She could taste blood in her mouth, and her entire face throbbed with pain she had never felt before. She tried to stand up, but her legs were too weak. Dr. Crouch stared down at her. "Don't look at me like that," he said, taking the reins. "It's survival of the fittest." "You don't touch my sister!" And Kip grabbed his leg, pulling him down from the bench. The man hit the ground beside them, the reins still in his hand. Galileo reared up on two legs. Molly heard a sharp creaking sound as Hester's net swayed from the tree, and then crack. The branch snapped clean from the trunk. Hester cried out as her net plummeted to the earth. She hit the ground with a back-breaking crash and was pinned beneath the branch. Molly heard a windy snarl. The night gardener staggered forward, stumbling to his knees. He dropped his shovel and watering can, which spilled uselessly onto the grass. Dr. Crouch watched beside Molly. What's happening to it? The night gardener was doubled over, writhing in pain. Leaves darted over his head, slashing this way and that in a flurry of confused rage. Molly looked up at the tree. Black sap covered the place where the branch had been torn off like blood from a wound. I don't think he liked that. The night gardener planted his hands on the ground and slowly, painfully brought himself to his feet. He teetered from side to side, his weight unsteady. He saw the broken branch atop Hester's body. He released a roar that shook the very ground. Dr. Crouch forgot about the horse and scrambled to his feet. It was all their idea, he cried out. It's them you want, and he started running as fast as he could in the opposite direction. The night gardener pointed his skeletal hands toward the stables. Molly heard a sharp, wrenching sound as a gust ripped wide the stable door clean off its hinges. The night gardener snapped his arms in the direction of the doctor, who was halfway to the bridge. The giant door soared across the lawn, spinning toward its target. Don't look! Molly grabbed Kip, covering his eyes. There was no scream, only a sharp, crashing sound. She looked across the lawn where the doctor had been. There was now only a door with two unmoving feet sticking out from beneath it. She stared back at the night gardener, who wore on his face a look of icy satisfaction. You killed him. You killed him. Her voice was barely a whisper. You killed him in cold blood right in front of us. The night gardener tipped his hat as if accepting a compliment. He stepped to the place where Hester lay. The old woman turned over, groaning under the weight of the branch. You pups best run, she croaked. A shimmer of blood trickled from her mouth. Kip grabbed Molly's arm. I can get the horse, but that rope's still tied to her. If we run, it will kill her. Molly scanned the moonlit ground, searching for something, anything that might protect them. She remembered what Kip had told her before, that the night gardener didn't like the fire. She needed a torch or a lamp or even a match. And then she saw it. Lying among the splintered bits of the doctor's camera was the metal flash pan. Cut the rope from the wagon, she called. I'll do the rest. She scrambled across the dirt, nearly tumbling into one of the graves. She grabbed the flash, and inside the pan was a small amount of white powder. Molly hoped it would work. The gardener had removed the branch from on top of Hester's body and set it beside the trunk. He held out a hand, and his shovel flew into it. Molly charged at the man, holding the flash in front of her. Over here! And she pulled the trigger, and a burst of fire erupted in her hands. The night gardener staggered backward, thrashing his arms as flames swept over his body. Molly coughed, shielding her face from the smoke. She scrambled to Hester's side. We're getting you out of here, she said. She grabbed Hester's shears and cut the net away from her body. The woman groaned in pain as Molly hoisted her up on her shoulder. Molly half carried, half dragged the woman to the wagon. Kip was there, waiting, with the gate down. The gardener roared behind Molly. She looked over her shoulder to see him staggering towards them, his body smoldering in the moonlight. The flames had burned away his cloak, and Molly gasped to see the man's leg. It was twisted in on itself. The bone splintered at the knee. Black sap ran thick down his trousers and boot, staining the grass as he moved. Get in front, Molly shouted, holding Hester's body. I've got her. Kip scrambled through the bed of the wagon and grabbed the reins. Molly braced her shoulder against Hester's weight and with a strained cry lifted the woman onto the cart. Go! She scrambled in after her. Kip snapped the reins and they bolted ahead. Molly gripped the side rails as they raced over the hills towards the gravel drive. Not hills, she thought. Graves. She could see the gardener coming after them. Even with his broken leg, he was inhumanly fast. Hold tight, Kip yelled as the wagon hit the drive and shot forward. The gardener, still right behind them, raised his hand, and a gust of wind brought Hester's shears into his open palm. He flung them at the wagon. Molly rolled to one side as the blade sank into the wood behind her, quivering like an arrow. "Faster!" she shouted at Kip as they rattled onto the wooden bridge. The gardener reached out a bony hand, snatching her leg. Molly screamed, kicking herself free. She heard a sharp howl and saw the gardener's body jerk backwards. It fell to the bridge with a crash. Molly nearly fell with him as Kip turned onto the road on the far side of the river. She clung to the side of the wagon, eyes fixed on the gardener. He snarled, pacing back and forth along the far end of the bridge, furious, but seemed unable to cross it. Molly, Kip, and Hester rattled up the path and around the bend. She could hear the gardener's howls echoing behind them. And with that, I have